Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Lecture 2 of the Controls Classroom. I'm going to be recording this in one take once again, hopefully, so please bear with me and we'll see how it goes. So first of all, I have some notes from since the last lecture. The first thing is that the website is now set up. Hopefully you have checked it out already if you're watching this, but that's where I'm going to be posting all of the lecture recordings, plus the slides, the readings, and the quizzes each week. So the quiz and the reading for this week are already out. And one thing I noticed with the last lecture is that everyone who responded said they use Windows, so I'll be using Windows for all the future demos. And so just a note on pacing. I understand that some of you may have already done stuff like this before, might have experience with the command line and sort of getting under the hood with the computer. But I would just try to keep an open mind. It's always good to review fundamentals, and maybe you'll learn something that you actually didn't know. Either way, I promise that we will be getting on to some pretty interesting C++ stuff within the next few weeks. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is the terminal. So if you remember from the first lecture, we installed Ubuntu and we typed in who am I and set our username. And so I'd like to kind of dig into some of the nomenclature. So the first thing is that this whole apparatus is called the terminal. So if I say open up the terminal or try it in the terminal, it means you should open up Ubuntu from the start menu and try it in this window. Digging into the window, we have this part where it says my username at the name of my computer, and that's called the prompt. It's prompting us to input something, and the thing that we're inputting, like who am I in this example, is called a command. And that command gives us output. So for example, the whoami command outputs our username, and you can see it's outputting cworley here. And then this little underscore that blinks in and out when you have the terminal running is called the cursor. So that's sort of what we're working with. You type in commands, you get output, it brings up another prompt, and you kind of repeat that process while you're working in the terminal. So what exactly are these commands that we're running using the terminal? And they're really just programs. It's no different than running a program by double-clicking it. It's just a different user interface. So there's not anything really magical about this. It's just a different way of using the computer. You've done these things before. You've ran programs by double-clicking them. It's just a different interface to doing that. The next thing I want to talk about is the file system, so how files are organized on the computer. So imagine you have this file called notes.txt down here in the bottom right. And you also have homework PDF and robot.cad. These need to be stored in a folder. You can't just have files floating around. And so let's say they're in your documents folder. Well, where does your documents folder live? Well, it lives in your home directory. If you have multiple people using the computer, you're going to have your own set of documents, so you each have your documents folder living in your home directory. And the home directories could contain things like music as well, or videos or pictures. You can imagine there's files underneath music here too. But where do the home directories live? And so when you're in Ubuntu, they live inside a directory called home. So, okay, you could have other users on the computer besides cworley or your username under home if multiple people use it. That's fair enough. But where does the home folder live? And the home folder lives under this special folder called slash. That's also referred to as the root. And so a way of thinking about this is that every file or folder has a parent folder. Notes.txt has to live inside documents, and documents has to live inside its own folder. And the only exception to this is the root. This is kind of where everything starts, so it doesn't have a parent directory. And so the next thing to talk about is a path. And so there are two types of paths, absolute paths and relative paths. So an absolute path tells you exactly where a file is located in that sort of hierarchy, and a relative path is a path that's relative to a different path. So if you want to find exactly where something is with a relative path, you have to combine it with an absolute path. So to give an example of an absolute path, you could have this one that looks like /home/cworley/documents/robot.cad. And so if you see a path like this, the way you interpret it is first you start with the slash. And that slash at the beginning tells you that it's an absolute path, and it tells you that we're starting at the root over here on the top right. The next thing is, well, once we're in the root, where do we go after that? And in the path, the thing that comes after that first slash is home. So you say, okay, I start at the root, and then the next part is home, so I go to home now. And then you have this slash here. This is different from the root. This is kind of just a separator to say that home and cworley are separate. So we'll say, okay, we got to home up until here, and then we know we have something different after that. And so we look at the next bit, and that's cworley. So we go from home down to cworley. And we continue along. We go from cworley to documents, and then finally at the end we have robot.cad. So we go from documents to robot.cad. So the slash at the beginning tells us to start at the root, and each item after that is sort of a component that we use to navigate from the root down to the actual file. And so a relative path would be just something like documents/robot.cad. And you could say, oh, well, you know, the computer's pretty smart. It could probably figure out that it's referring to this documents down here and this robot.cad. But really, the computer isn't all that smart, and there are ways that it could get confused. For example, if somebody like Kit also used the computer, he would have his own home directory here, and he could have his own documents folder, and he could have his own robot.cad. And so the computer is not going to make an assumption about which one is the right one. You need to combine an absolute path with the relative path to get something that can start at the root and work its way down to the actual file. So if relative paths need an absolute path to be useful, like, what's the point? Isn't that really inconvenient? Like, don't you need to manually join them with an absolute path to be useful? And the answer would be yes, but the terminal does something to help us. The terminal keeps track of something called the present working directory. And so if I switch over to Windows here, and I fire up Ubuntu, there is a command I can run called pwd that will tell us the present working directory. And if I run that, it says home/cworley. And that's an absolute path because it starts with that initial slash there. And so when you give the terminal a relative path, it will put the pwd in front of it, which kind of gives you a concept of a working directory, or like a current directory when you're in the terminal. There are some special paths that the terminal handles in unique ways. So there's dot, which just refers to the pwd. So if you did dot/documents/robot.cad, that would become the pwd plus documents/robot.cad. If you do double dot, that's the parent directory of the pwd. So if you did this absolute path of home cworley documents ... that would become home cworley. You can think of the ... just removing whatever comes before it. So it removes the documents and you just get home cworley. And then this tilde on the top left of the keyboard represents the home directory. So if you type in tilde in a command, that will become your like /home/ whatever your username was. So there are some commands that you can use to manipulate the file system. So I'll demonstrate them now. The first one is cd. So that changes the PWD to a different directory. And so if I go back into Windows here, let's say I want to go from home cworley to just home. I could do cd ... and if I do PWD again, you can see that it's changed the PWD back to home. If I want to go back to my home directory, I just do cd tilde. And if I PWD again, you can see it's back in home cworley. The next command is ls, which will list files in a directory. So if I run it in my home directory, I haven't created any files yet, but if I look at the parent directory, you can see that cworley is inside /home. So another way of showing this is if I do ls/home, you can also see cworley is in there. So this is listing the folders that are in /home, and /home/cworley is obviously a part of that. The next thing you can do is mkdir, which will create a directory. It stands for make directory. And so to demonstrate that, I can make a directory called holy cow. And if I do ls dot, you can see that there's a new directory named holy cow there. Because I didn't give it an absolute path, it combined it with the PWD. So another way of showing this is if I did mkdir /home/cworley holy cow 2 and then did ls or ls dot, you can also see holy cow 2 here. So if you give these commands an absolute path like this, they'll work. But if you just give them a relative path like this, they'll combine it with your current PWD. And since our current PWD is home cworley, you can see both of them end up in the same place. So RM can remove files or directories. I won't demonstrate that right now. Nano can edit text files. Cat can read text files. So I can show that off real quick. If I do nano notes.txt, I can type something in like, these are my lecture notes, and I'll exit out. Don't worry about how you use Nano, the reading will go over it. And so if I do ls again, you can see that I've created a file called notes.txt, and if I do cat notes.txt, you can see the text that I just wrote into it. There's mv, which will move or rename a file, and there's cp, which will create a copy of a file or a directory. So I can demonstrate those real quick. So I can move notes to notes2.txt. So I'm saying I want to move notes, and I want the destination to be notes2. So I'm kind of using it as a way of renaming the file. And if I run ls again, you can see that notes2 is now there and notes is gone. And copy works the same way. I'm sure you can imagine it, and it's also covered in the reading. So that's the quick rundown of these commands that manipulate the file system. These are really useful to know. They're going to be super common when you're using the terminal. So yeah, if you have any questions about these sort of core commands, absolutely reach out in Slack, because you really want to have a solid understanding of these. So some final thoughts. The reading and the quiz are on the website. The reading is going to cover a lot of this stuff in greater detail, and it's going to have some exercises you can look at. So let me actually pull those up for you. So if I open up Firefox here, and I'll give it a second to start up, and you go to connorworley.com/frc-controls-classroom, and I'll zoom this in for you. You can see that the reading Unix for the Beginning Mage is linked. Oh, there it is. When you're going through this reading, you're going to see these sections that have these gray boxes, and every time you run into one of these gray boxes, you should have the terminal open on like the side, and you should be following along trying to run the commands. So if you see this box that says pwd while you're doing the reading, you should be going into Ubuntu and running pwd to compare with the reading. So that's all the advice I have for the reading right now. Definitely don't hesitate to ask questions in Slack if you have any, and please try to complete the quiz by next weekend. Thanks, everybody.